The job posting had been too good to be true. $30 an hour for overnight security at a historic cemetery. No experience required, immediate start. Standing at the wrought iron gates of Old Fort Cemetery at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, I was starting to understand why they were so desperate for applicants. The place looked like something out of a horror movie. Fog rolled between weathered headstones that tilted at odd angles, and the ancient oak trees creaked overhead despite the still air. A rusted sign by the entrance read, "Established 1668," in letters so faded I had to squint to make them out. "You must be Heather." I spun around to find a man approaching from the shadows near a small security booth. He was maybe 65, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of outdoor work. His uniform shirt had Felix embroidered above the pocket. "Felix Gonzalez," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I'll be training you tonight." His grip was firm, but his hands trembled slightly. Up close, I could see deep lines around his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that suggested this job took more of a toll than simple night security should. 37 years I've been working these grounds," Felix continued, leading me toward the booth. "Started when I was your age. Figured I'd do it for a few months while I looked for something better." He let out a dry chuckle. "Funny how life works out." The security booth was cramped but functional. A desk, 2 chairs, a logbook, and a thermos that smelled like coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Felix pulled a laminated card from his shirt pocket and placed it on the desk between us. 4 rules, he said. "Memorize them. Follow them exactly. Your life depends on it." I picked up the card. The typing was faded, probably done on an old typewriter decades ago. Rule 1. Maintain complete silence between 2:00 a.m. and 3:00 a.m. Do not speak, cough, or make any unnecessary noise during this hour. Rule 2. If you encounter the woman in white near the right family plot, do not approach. Back away slowly while maintaining eye contact until she is no longer visible. Rule 3. If you hear laughter, do not laugh in return. Cover your ears and hum loudly until the sound stops. Rule 4. The boy in the sailor suit will ask for help finding his mother. Speak with him kindly, but do not follow him anywhere. These seem... I started, then stopped. Felix's expression had gone completely serious. Seem what? Crazy? Made up? He leaned back in his chair. Every guard gets that look. Every guard thinks they know better. Most of them don't last a week. What happened to the others? Some quit. Some... Felix shrugged. Some didn't. I flipped the card over and found a 5th rule written in different handwriting, the ink newer but still faded. Rule 5. Never enter the crypt beneath the old chapel. "What's in the crypt?" I asked. Felix's face went pale. Some questions are better left unasked. "But if I'm going to be working here..." "No." His voice cut through the air like a blade. "That's not a rule you question. That's not a rule you test. That's the rule that keeps you breathing." The silence stretched between us. Outside, something rustled in the leaves, though I hadn't felt any wind. "Look," Felix said finally, his voice gentler. "I know how this sounds. When I started, the previous guard gave me the same speech, the same rules. I thought he was pulling my leg, trying to scare the new guy." He touched a scar that ran from his left ear to his jawline. "I learned better." "What happened?" "I got curious about Rule 5. He stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a heavy-duty flashlight. "This is yours. Fresh batteries, LED bulb, military grade. Grip it tight. Dropping your light can be fatal." I took the flashlight, surprised by its weight. "Fatal how?" "The spirits here are old, Heather. Older than the cemetery. Older than the town. They've been here since before the first European settlers arrived, and they'll be here long after we're gone." Felix pulled a folded map from the desk drawer. "This is your patrol route. Stick to the marked paths. Avoid the areas marked in red. The map showed the cemetery layout with a clear route traced in blue ink. Several sections were marked with red X's, including a large area near the back, where Old Chapel Crypt was written in block letters. You'll do 3 patrols per night, Felix continued. First at midnight, second at 1 a.m., third at 4 a.m., never during the quiet hour. That's when they're strongest. They? Felix looked at me for a long moment. The woman in white visits her husband's grave every night at 2 a.m. Been doing it since 1867. She died the day after her wedding, found at the cemetery gates in her dress. No one knows how she got there or why she died. And the boy? Timothy Hartley, 7 years old when scarlet fever took him in 1903. His mother died 3 days before him. He's been looking for her ever since. Felix's voice softened. He's not malicious, just lost. But following him, he shook his head. 3 guards have followed him over the years. We found their bodies days later, all in places that should have been impossible to reach. I stared at the rules card, trying to process what I was hearing. And the laughter? That one's harder to explain. Something that feeds on joy, on the sound of human happiness. It mimics laughter to draw people in. Then, Felix made a gesture like something being pulled away. Johnny Marquez laughed back in 1987. We found him 3 days later. He died laughing. The rational part of my mind was screaming that this was all elaborate nonsense, some kind of hazing ritual for new employees. But Felix's scars were real, and the tremor in his hands wasn't from age. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why not just let me figure it out myself? Because I've seen too many good people die from curiosity. Felix sat back down, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. The job pays well for a reason. $30 an hour, full benefits, no questions asked about your background. They can afford to be generous because most people don't last long enough to collect more than a few paychecks. But you did. I followed the rules. Every single night for 37 years, I followed the rules without exception, without testing them, without trying to understand why they existed. He pulled out his car keys. That's the only reason I'm still here to train you. Felix stood and walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing. The crypt beneath the chapel. It's not just off limits. It's dangerous in ways that the other spirits aren't. Whatever's down there has been contained for a very long time, and it wants out. Every guard eventually hears it calling. The smart ones resist. What about the ones who don't? They become part of the reason the rules exist. He opened the door and stepped outside. The fog had grown thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. Your shift starts now. First patrol at midnight. That's in 43 minutes. Stay on the marked path, keep your flashlight steady, and remember, the rules aren't suggestions. Felix, wait. But he was already walking toward the parking area, his footsteps echoing off the headstones. I heard a car door slam, an engine start, and then the sound faded into the distance, leaving me alone with the fog and the silence and the laminated card that felt like a lifeline in my sweating palm. I checked my watch, 11:17 p.m., 43 minutes until my first patrol. I sat in the security booth and read the rules again, trying to memorize every word. Outside, the fog continued to roll between the graves, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard the faint sound of footsteps on gravel. The job paid well for a reason. Felix's words echoed in my mind as I gripped the flashlight and waited for midnight, already understanding that the next 8 hours would either prove him right or make me another cautionary tale for the next guard, if there was a next guard. I opened the logbook and found pages of entries dating back decades, each in different handwriting. Some ended with "end of shift, all quiet." Others stopped mid-sentence. The most recent entry, dated 2 years ago, was signed D. Hughes and contained only 4 words. Something knows my name. I turned to a fresh page and wrote, H. Murphy, first night, 11:17 p.m. Rules received and understood. Then I sat back to wait for midnight, watching the fog swirl around headstones that were older than the country itself, and tried not to think about what might be watching me back. I fumbled with the flashlight as I rounded the corner near the Whitmore family plot, my fingers numb from the October cold. The thing was heavier than I'd expected, and my grip had gotten sloppy after 2 hours of carrying it around. The flashlight slipped. It hit the granite headstone with a crack that might as well have been a gunshot in the silence. The sound bounced off monuments and mausoleums, echoing back from every direction until I couldn't tell where it had started. Then it rolled down the slight incline, clanking against 2 more stones before coming to rest against a wrought iron fence. The silence that followed wasn't normal silence. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums, that made you aware of your own heartbeat and breathing. Waiting silence. Then I heard them. Whispers. Soft at first, like wind through leaves, but there wasn't any wind. The voices spoke in something that definitely wasn't English. Syllables that seemed to stick in my throat just from hearing them. The sounds came from my left, then my right, then behind me. Getting closer. I pressed myself against the back of a tall monument, some Victorian thing with angels carved into the sides. The stone was ice cold, even through my jacket. I tried to control my breathing, taking shallow, silent breaths through my nose while my heart hammered against my ribs. Through the fog, I saw them. Shadows that moved wrong, not cast by anything, not following the rules of light and darkness I'd grown up with. They slid between the headstones with purpose, flowing like water but maintaining distinct shapes. Some were tall and thin, others squat and wide. All of them were heading toward the spot where my flashlight lay. I counted at least 6, maybe more. They circled the area where the sound had come from, moving in patterns that reminded me of hunting dogs following a scent. One shadow lingered longer than the others, its form more solid, more human-shaped than the rest. It turned slowly in my direction. I held my breath. The shadow stayed motionless for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My lungs started burning. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. Still, I didn't dare breathe. The human-shaped shadow tilted its head like it was listening. Then it drifted away to rejoin the others. The whispers continued for another few minutes, growing fainter as the shadows moved deeper into the cemetery. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then waited another 20 minutes on top of that. My legs had gone stiff from staying in one position, and when I finally moved, my knees cracked loud enough to make me wince. I crept toward my flashlight, every step deliberate and silent. The thing was still working, its beam cutting through the fog at an odd angle. I grabbed it and checked my watch. 2:31 a.m. I'd been hiding for over 40 minutes. The quiet hour was almost over. The walk back to the security booth felt like it took forever. Every shadow looked suspicious now. Every rustle of leaves made me freeze. But nothing else happened. At 3 a.m. exactly, the oppressive silence lifted, replaced by normal nighttime sounds. Distant traffic, the hum of power lines, a dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood. I collapsed into the chair and opened the logbook with shaking hands. The pages were filled with entries in different handwriting dating back decades. Some were brief. End of shift. All quiet. Others were longer, describing encounters similar to what I'd just experienced. I found an entry from 1987. Dropped my radio during patrol. They came for the sound, stayed hidden until dawn. Note to self, grip everything tighter. Another from 1994. The whispers know when you're listening. Don't try to understand what they're saying. And one from 2003. Third time I've seen the shadows hunt. They're looking for something specific. Or someone. I flipped through more pages, looking for patterns. Most guards seemed to last a few weeks or months before their entries stopped. Some wrote "quit" as their final entry. Others just stopped writing. The most recent entries were from 2 years ago, signed D. Hughes. His handwriting started neat and confident, but grew increasingly erratic over several weeks. The final entries caught my attention. Day 23. Something's moving inside the crypt. Scratching sounds like fingernails on stone. Day 26. Knocked on the crypt door during patrol. Something knocked back, 3 times, just like I did. Day 28. It knows my name. I can hear it calling through the door. Dominic, Dominic. How does it know? Day 30. Going to check the crypt tonight. Need to know what's down there. If I don't come back... The entry ended mid-sentence. No more entries after that. I turned to a fresh page and wrote, H. Murphy, Night 3, 2:47 a.m. Dropped flashlight near Whitmore plot. Shadows responded to sound. Stayed hidden until they left. Note, the whispers aren't random. They're hunting. I paused, then added, D. Hughes mentioned something in the crypt. Need to ask Felix about this. The rest of my shift passed quietly. I did my 4 a.m. patrol without incident, sticking religiously to the marked path and keeping my flashlight gripped with both hands. At 6 a.m., Felix's car pulled into the parking area. He looked tired as he walked to the booth, but his eyes were alert. How was the night? I dropped my flashlight, I said, during the quiet hour. Felix's expression went serious. What happened? I told him about the shadows, the whispers, the way they'd hunted for the source of the sound. Felix nodded along, like he'd heard similar stories before. You did good, he said when I finished. Staying hidden was the right choice. The shadows are drawn to sudden sounds, especially during the quiet hour. They're not malicious exactly, just curious. But their curiosity can be dangerous. What are they? Echoes, Felix said. Impressions left behind by people who died here over the centuries. Most of them don't even know they're dead. They just respond to stimuli. Sounds, movements, emotions. I showed him D. Hughes's entries in the logbook. Felix's face darkened as he read. Dominic was a good guard, he said finally. Smart, careful, followed the rules, but he got curious about the wrong thing. What happened to him? Felix closed the logbook. We found his body 3 days after his last entry. He was inside the crypt. How did he get in? I thought it was locked. It's not locked. Never has been. The only thing keeping that door closed is the good sense of the people who work here. Felix met my eyes. Dominic lost his good sense. But what's down there? Something that's been contained for a very long time. Something that wants out. Felix stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the cemetery in the growing daylight. Every guard eventually hears it calling. The smart ones resist. And the ones who don't, they become part of the reason the rules exist. Felix gathered his things and headed for the door. Get some sleep, Heather. You've earned it, and remember, curiosity killed more than just cats in this place. I watched him drive away, then looked back at the logbook. D. Hughes had lasted 30 days before his curiosity got the better of him. I'd made it 3 nights. I wrote one more line in my entry. Survived first real encounter. Beginning to understand why the job pays so well. Then I locked the booth and walked to my car, trying not to look toward the old chapel where the crypt waited beneath the ground. I could feel it there, patient and hungry, knowing that eventually every guard heard its call. The question wasn't whether I'd be tempted to investigate. The question was whether I'd be smart enough to resist when the time came. The crying started at exactly 2 a.m. I was halfway through my midnight patrol when I heard it. Soft sobbing that seemed to drift from the older section of the cemetery. The sound was heartbreaking, The kind of grief that makes your chest tight even when you don't know the source. I checked my watch. 2 a.m. on the dot. The quiet hour was starting. According to the rules, I should have been heading back to the booth by now. But the crying pulled at something deep in my chest, and before I could think better of it, I was walking toward the sound instead of away from it. The fog had rolled in thick tonight, reducing my flashlight beam to maybe 10 feet of visibility. Headstones emerged from the mist like ships in a harbor, their carved names and dates appearing and disappearing as I passed. The crying grew clearer as I got closer. Definitely a woman. Definitely in pain. I found her kneeling beside a moss-covered headstone in the Wright family plot. She wore a Victorian wedding dress, all white lace and pearl buttons, with a long train that spread around her like spilled milk. Her hair hung loose down her back, moving gently even though there wasn't any wind. The dress should have been dirty after more than a century, but it glowed with its own pale light. The woman in white. Rule number 2. I stopped walking, remembering Felix's warning. Don't approach. Back away slowly while maintaining eye contact. But I was already close enough to read the headstone she knelt beside. Jonathan Wright, 1834-1867, beloved husband. Below that, in smaller letters, taken too soon, mourned forever. The woman's sobs were quiet but constant, her shoulders shaking with each breath. She pressed her hands against the stone like she was trying to push through it to reach whatever lay beneath. I should have started backing away immediately, should have followed the rules that had kept me alive for 2 weeks. Instead, I took another step forward, trying to see if there were other graves nearby, other clues about what had happened to this couple. The crying stopped. The silence hit me like a physical blow. No more sobbing, no distant traffic, no wind through the trees. Even my own breathing seemed muffled, like the air itself had gone dead. The woman in white began to turn her head. The movement was wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, like a door swinging on rusted hinges. Her neck rotated further than any living person's could, a full 90 degrees, then more. I heard vertebrae popping, joints grinding against each other. When she finally faced me, I understood why the rule said to maintain eye contact. She had no eyes. Where they should have been were hollow sockets, dark and deep and somehow pulling at my vision. Looking into them was like staring into a well at midnight. You couldn't see the bottom, couldn't tell how far down they went. The darkness seemed to move, swirling like water, and I felt myself leaning forward without meaning to. My foot slipped on the wet grass. The small sound broke whatever spell those empty sockets had cast, and I jerked backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The woman in white stood up. She moved like she was underwater, each motion flowing into the next without the small hesitations that marked living movement. Her dress didn't rustle. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground. She rose until she towered over the headstone, easily 6 feet tall, maybe more. She reached one pale hand toward me. Her fingers were too long, too thin, stretching like she could bridge the 15 feet between us, just by wanting it badly enough. Her mouth opened in what should have been a scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I felt the vibration in my bones, in my teeth, like standing too close to a church bell when it rings. I started backing away. 1 step, 2, 3. The woman in white followed, her feet, if they were feet, gliding over the grass without disturbing it. Her hand stayed extended, fingers grasping at air, and that silent scream kept reverberating through my skeleton. 4 steps, 5, 6. She was gaining on me, not walking faster, just somehow covering more ground with each movement. The distance between us shrank from 15 feet to 12 to 10, 7 steps. The woman in white stopped. She stood perfectly still, 1 foot raised like she'd hit an invisible wall. Her hand was maybe 8 feet from my face now, close enough that I could see the wedding ring on her finger. a simple gold band that caught my flashlight beam. Her mouth closed. The bone-deep vibration stopped. We stared at each other, me with my eyes, her with those terrible empty sockets. I could feel her trying to pull me forward, not physically, but something deeper. Like she was tugging at the part of me that wanted to help, that couldn't stand to see someone in pain. I took another step backward. The woman in white tilted her head, and for a moment she looked almost confused, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't coming closer, why her grief wasn't enough to draw me in. I kept backing away, one careful step at a time, never breaking eye contact with those hollow sockets. My heel hit the edge of the main path, the boundary between the Wright family plot and the rest of the cemetery. The woman in white dropped her hand. She turned away from me with that same mechanical slowness, her dress swirling around her like fog. By the time she faced Jonathan's grave again, she was already sinking back to her knees. The sobbing resumed as if it had never stopped. I stood on the path for another 5 minutes, watching her mourn. She never looked at me again, never acknowledged that I was there. She pressed her hands against the headstone and cried for her husband, lost in a grief so deep it had anchored her to this spot for over a century. Back in the security booth, I opened the logbook with shaking hands. I flipped through pages of entries looking for anything about the woman in white, about Jonathan Wright, about what had happened in 1867. Tucked between 2 pages near the back, I found a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local woman found dead at cemetery gates." The article was brief. Margaret Wright, age 22, was discovered deceased at the entrance to Old Fort Cemetery yesterday morning, still wearing her wedding dress from the previous day's ceremony. Mrs. Wright had been married to Jonathan Wright on Saturday afternoon in what witnesses described as a joyful celebration. The cause of her death remains unknown, and authorities are baffled as to how she came to be at the cemetery, as she had no known connections to the location. Mr. Wright was reportedly too distraught to speak with reporters. Services for Mrs. Wright will be held Thursday at St. Mary's Church. I read the clipping 3 times, trying to piece together what had happened. Margaret Wright had died the day after her wedding, found at the cemetery gates in her dress. But the headstone said Jonathan had died in 1867, the same year as their wedding. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search for historical records. It took some digging, but I found what I was looking for in a digitized church registry. Jonathan Wright had died on October 15, 1867. Margaret Wright had married him on October 16, 1867. She'd been found dead on October 17, 1867. She'd married a dead man, or thought she had. Maybe Jonathan had died suddenly, maybe from disease or accident, and Margaret had been so devastated that she'd... what? Gone to the cemetery to be with him, died of grief? The records didn't say. But they explained why she was still here, still mourning, still trying to reach through the stone to touch her husband's remains. I wrote my entry for the night. H. Murphy, night 14, 2:23 a.m., encountered woman in white at Wright family plot. Followed Rule 2, backed away while maintaining eye contact. She stopped at what seemed to be a boundary line. Research shows Margaret Wright died day after wedding. Husband Jonathan died day before wedding. She's been mourning him for 156 years. I paused, then added, "Note, the boundary she couldn't cross seemed to be the edge of the family plot. Something is keeping her contained to that specific area." The rest of my shift passed quietly. I did my 4 a.m. patrol without incident, giving the Wright family plot a wide berth. But I kept thinking about Margaret Wright kneeling by that grave, pressing her hands against stone that would never give way. When Felix arrived at 6 a.m., I showed him the newspaper clipping and told him what I'd discovered. "Margaret Wright," he said, nodding slowly. "She's been here longer than I have. 37 years I've been watching her mourn. Why can't she leave the plot? Love, Felix said simply. The strongest anchor there is. She bound herself to that grave so completely that even death couldn't break the connection. He looked out the window toward the Wright family plot. But love that strong, that obsessive, it changes, becomes something else. What do you mean? She doesn't just mourn Jonathan anymore. She wants others to join her, to understand her loss by experiencing it themselves. Felix met my eyes. That's why you have to back away. Get too close and she'll try to make you part of her story. What happens if someone doesn't back away? Felix was quiet for a long moment. 3 guards have gotten too close over the years. We found their bodies at Jonathan's grave, lying next to Margaret. They'd died of exposure, but he shrugged. It was July when we found the last one. 90 degrees outside. I thought about those empty eye sockets, the way they'd seemed to pull at something inside me. She tried to draw me in. She tries to draw everyone in. The grief is real, but it's also a trap. She wants company in her mourning. Felix gathered his things. You did good tonight, Heather. Following the rules when your heart tells you to do otherwise, that's the hardest part of this job. After Felix left, I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving home. I could see the Wright family plot from the parking area, just a dark cluster of headstones in the morning mist. Somewhere in there, Margaret Wright was probably still kneeling, still crying, still trying to reach through stone and earth to touch the husband she'd lost before she'd ever really had him. I started my car and drove away, but I couldn't stop thinking about her, about love so strong it survived death, and how something that beautiful could become something so dangerous. The job paid well for a reason. I was starting to understand that the reason wasn't just the supernatural encounters, it was learning to walk away from them. I pressed my palms against my ears and started humming "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" as loud as I could manage. The laughter had started 5 minutes ago, soft and sweet, like a kid playing hide and seek. Now it sounded like someone losing their mind, all sharp edges and broken glass. It circled me in the fog, moving from headstone to headstone, getting closer with each pass. My chest kept trying to bubble up with giggles. Every time the sound hit a certain pitch, my diaphragm would spasm and my mouth would want to open. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste copper, using the pain to stay focused. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," I hummed louder, the words vibrating through my skull. "How I wonder what you are." The laughter changed direction, coming at me from the left now. Through my peripheral vision, I caught movement that made my stomach drop. Not a shadow this time, something worse. The air itself was bending, rippling like heat waves, but in reverse, creating a distortion that hurt to look at directly. It had arms, sort of, long-reaching things that stretched and contracted as it moved, testing the space between us. I stumbled backward, still humming, still pressing my hands against my ears. The melody was the only thing keeping me anchored. Every time I paused to breathe, the laughter would surge forward, trying to fill the silence. "Up above the world so high," I sang under my breath, backing toward the fence line, like a diamond in the sky. The ripple followed me, staying just out of reach. I could feel it studying me, waiting for me to slip up, waiting for me to laugh back. My heel hit something solid, the iron fence around the Morrison family plot. The metal was ice cold even through my jacket, but it gave me something to lean against. Something real and fixed in a world that was starting to feel like it was melting around the edges. The ripple stopped maybe 3 feet from my face. This close, I could see details that made my skin crawl. The distortion wasn't empty. There were shapes moving inside it, fragments of faces that appeared and dissolved before I could focus on them. Mouths stretched wide in eternal laughter, eyes that had gone completely white, hands clapping in rhythm with the sound. The laughter got louder, more insistent. It wanted me to join in, wanted me to open my mouth and let it pour out of me until there was nothing left but the sound. I kept humming. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The ripple reached toward me with one of those not-quite arms. I felt the temperature drop another 10 degrees. My breath came out in white puffs that the thing seemed to inhale, drawing them into its distorted center. How I wonder what you are. The arm thing stopped inches from my face. I could feel it testing my resolve, pressing against the barrier of sound I'd built around myself. The humming was all that stood between me and whatever had happened to Johnny Marquez in 1987. I started the song over, louder this time. My voice cracked on the high notes, but I kept going. The ripple shuddered, its edges becoming less defined. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The laughter began to fade, not all at once. It retreated slowly, reluctantly, like it was being pulled away against its will. The ripple started dissolving from the outside in, the fragments of faces becoming harder to see. How I wonder what you are. By the time I finished the verse, the thing was gone. The laughter had faded to nothing. The temperature started climbing back toward normal, though my hands were still numb from the cold. I stayed pressed against the fence for another 10 minutes, humming softly to myself. My throat was raw and my ears were ringing, but I was alive. I was still me. When I finally felt steady enough to move, I walked back to the security booth on shaking legs. The logbook was open on the desk, and tucked between 2 pages was a folded piece of paper I hadn't seen before. Felix's handwriting, neat and careful. The laughing woman takes those who laugh back. Johnny Marquez laughed back in 1987. We found his body 3 days later. He died laughing. I sat down hard in the chair and read the note 3 more times. Then I flipped through the logbook until I found an entry from October 1987, written in Felix's younger handwriting. J. Marquez, day 12, found deceased at 6 a.m. near Whitmore Plot. Cause of death unknown. Body showed signs of extreme muscle strain consistent with prolonged laughter. Coroner ruled it a heart attack brought on by unknown stimulus. Note: Marquez had reported hearing laughter during previous shifts, but claimed it was friendly. Recommend adding rule about auditory encounters. Below that, in different ink, someone had added, Rule 3 implemented. No guard deaths from laughter since 1987. I turned to a fresh page and wrote my own entry. H. Murphy, night 23, 2:17 a.m. Encountered the laughing woman near Morrison Plot. Followed Rule 3, covered ears and hummed loudly. Entity manifested as visual distortion with reaching appendages. Maintained humming until it retreated. Note: the laughter is designed to be contagious. Physical pain helped resist the compulsion to respond. I paused, then added, Johnny Marquez died because he thought it was friendly. The laughter isn't malicious exactly, but it's hungry. It feeds on the response. The rest of my shift passed quietly. I did my 4 a.m. patrol without incident, though I gave the Morrison Plot a wide berth. Every few minutes I'd catch myself starting to smile for no reason, and I'd bite my tongue again to snap myself out of it. When Felix arrived at 6 a.m., I showed him the note and told him what had happened. He nodded as I described the ripple, the reaching arms, the fragments of faces. You did exactly right, he said. The humming creates a barrier. Gives your mind something to focus on besides the compulsion to laugh. What is it? The thing that makes the laughter? Felix was quiet for a moment, looking out the window toward the older section of the cemetery. We're not sure. Could be a spirit, could be something else entirely. What we know is that it's been here since at least the 1950s, maybe longer. And it's patient. Patient how? It doesn't attack right away. It starts gentle, friendly, like you said. Makes you think it's harmless. Johnny thought he'd made friends with it. Spent 2 weeks listening to what he called the giggling lady before it finally got him to laugh back. I thought about how pleasant the sound had been at first, how my face had automatically smiled in response. It's a trap. Everything here is a trap in one way or another. The difference is knowing which ones you can escape from. Felix gathered his things and headed for the door. You've been here almost a month now, Heather. That's longer than most. How much longer did Johnny last? 12 days. Felix paused in the doorway. You're already twice as smart as he was. After Felix left, I sat in my car for a while before driving home. I kept thinking about Johnny Marquez, about how he'd thought the laughter was friendly, how he'd probably felt special, chosen, like he'd made a connection with something supernatural. I touched my tongue where I'd bitten it. The pain was already fading, but I could still taste blood. The job paid well because it required you to hurt yourself to survive it, because it asked you to resist every human instinct toward connection and curiosity, because it demanded that you treat wonder as a weapon pointed at your heart. I started my car and drove home, humming Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star under my breath. Some songs, I was learning, were more than just music. Sometimes they were the only thing standing between you and becoming another cautionary tale in someone else's logbook. The boy appeared at exactly 3 a.m., materializing near the children's section like morning mist taking shape. I was halfway through my patrol when I spotted him standing between two small headstones, perfectly still in the way only children can manage when they're concentrating hard on something. He looked maybe 7 years old, wearing a navy blue sailor suit with white piping and brass buttons that gleamed despite the fog. His brown curls caught what little moonlight filtered through the clouds. He was more solid than Margaret or the laughing thing. Not translucent, not rippling with distortion. Just a small boy in old-fashioned clothes, standing in a cemetery at 3 in the morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. Timothy. Rule number 4. I stopped walking but didn't back away. Felix had been clear about this one. Speak kindly, but don't follow. The boy wasn't dangerous like the others. He was just lost. Hello there, I called softly. Timothy turned toward me, and his face lit up with hope. Oh, hello, miss. Have you seen my mother? She was supposed to meet me by the big oak tree, but I've been waiting ever since supper, and she hasn't come. His voice sounded like an old recording, slightly hollow but clear enough to understand every word. The accent was different too, more formal, the way children spoke when they were taught proper manners. I haven't seen her, I said, staying where I was. What's your name? Timothy Hartley, but everyone calls me Timmy. He took a step closer and I could see his face more clearly. Round cheeks, dark eyes that seemed too serious for his age, a small mouth that kept shifting between hope and worry. Mother said she'd come find me after she finished her errands, but that was hours ago. I needed to keep him talking without encouraging him to lead me anywhere. Felix had mentioned asking about toys, friends, anything to distract him from his search. That's a nice sailor suit, Timothy. Is it new? His whole face brightened. Father bought it for me last month when the ship came in. He said I looked like a proper sailor boy. Timothy smoothed down the front of his jacket with obvious pride. Mother says it makes me look very grown up. I bet it does. Do you have any toys at home? Any favorites? Oh, yes. Timothy bounced on his toes, suddenly animated. Father carved me a wooden horse. It's got a real leather saddle and everything. And I have a spinning top that makes the most wonderful humming sound when you get it going just right. His expression grew wistful. And there's Pepper. He's my dog. Well, he's supposed to be the whole family's dog, but he sleeps in my room and follows me everywhere. The enthusiasm in his voice was infectious. I found myself smiling despite the circumstances. Pepper sounds like a good friend. The best friend. He knows when I'm sad and comes to put his head on my lap. Mother says dogs can sense feelings better than people sometimes. Timothy's face clouded over. I hope he's not worried about me. I've been gone so long. The conversation was working exactly like Felix had said it would. Timothy was getting caught up in memories, distracted from his desperate search. but then his expression shifted, becoming urgent and focused. "Miss, you seem very kind. Could you help me find my mother? I know where she is now. She's waiting for me, but she's in a place that's hard to reach alone." Timothy stepped closer, extending his small hand toward me. "Please? She's been waiting so long, and I think she might be hurt. She needs help." I looked down at his outstretched hand and felt something twist in my chest. The maternal instinct hit me like a physical blow. This child needed help, was asking for help, and every fiber of my being wanted to take his hand and follow him wherever he needed to go. "Timothy," I said carefully, "I have to stay at my post. I'm working, and I can't leave." "But she's not far, just past the old section, near the woods. She's trapped somewhere dark and cold, and she's calling for me." His voice cracked with desperation. "I can hear her crying." He reached for my hand again, and this time I didn't pull back fast enough. His fingers closed around mine, and the cold hit me immediately. Not painful cold, but something deeper, like touching silk that had been left in a freezer. His grip was surprisingly strong for such a small hand. "Please," Timothy whispered, and his eyes filled with tears. "She's hurt and scared, and I can't help her by myself. You're the first grown-up who's talked to me in so long. You're the first one who's been kind." The pull wasn't physical. It was emotional, psychological, hitting every protective instinct I'd ever had. My feet took a step forward before I even realized I was moving. This was a child in distress, asking for help finding his mother. How could I possibly refuse? But Felix's warning echoed in my head. 3 guards who followed Timothy were found dead days later in impossible locations. I dug my fingernails into my free palm, using the pain to anchor myself. "Timothy, I'm sure your mother will find you soon. Mothers always find their children." "But she's trapped." His grip tightened, and the cold spread up my arm. "She can't get out by herself. She needs someone to help her, and I'm too small. Please, miss. Please come with me." The tears were real. The desperation was real. The love for his mother was absolutely, heartbreakingly real. But so was the danger. I gently but firmly pulled my hand free from his grip. The cold lingered for several seconds after we broke contact. "I can't leave my post, Timothy. I'm sorry." His face crumpled. The tears spilled over, and he began to sob with the complete abandon that only children can manage. "She's all alone," he cried. "She's been alone for so long, and she's scared, and I promised I'd bring help." Every instinct screamed at me to comfort him, to promise I'd help, to do whatever it took to stop those heartbreaking sobs. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste blood, using the pain to stay focused. "Your mother loves you very much," I said, my voice thick with emotion I couldn't quite suppress. "She wouldn't want you to be sad. She'd want you to be safe." Timothy looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You really won't come?" "I really can't." He stared at me for a long moment, hope dying in his expression. Then he nodded slowly, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I understand. You have important work to do." The mature acceptance in his voice was somehow worse than the crying had been. Timothy turned and began walking toward the older section of the cemetery, his small figure already starting to fade around the edges. Near the large oak tree, he stopped and looked back at me one last time. "If you see my mother," he called, his voice growing distant, "will you tell her I'm still looking for her?" "I will," I promised. Timothy waved, a small, sad gesture, and then he was gone. Not gradually, just there one moment and absent the next, like someone had turned off a light. I stood alone among the children's headstones, my hand still cold from his touch. The maternal instinct was fading, but slowly, leaving behind a hollow ache in my chest. Back at the security booth, I pulled out my phone and searched for Timothy Hartley. It took some digging through historical records, but I found what I was looking for in a digitized church registry from 1903. Timothy Hartley, aged 7, died October 12, 1903. Cause of death, scarlet fever. Eleanor Hartley, aged 29, died October 9, 1903. Cause of death, scarlet fever. Timothy had died 3 days after his mother. Both were buried in unmarked graves. The family couldn't afford proper headstones. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Timothy had been waiting for his mother for over a century, not knowing she was already dead, not understanding that she couldn't come find him because she was trapped in the same state he was, somewhere else in this cemetery. I opened the logbook and found entries about Timothy scattered throughout the decades. Guards describing a polite little boy who asked for help finding his mother. Most entries were brief, noting that they'd followed the rule and refused to go with him. But 3 entries ended differently. 1967. Monsieur Patterson, day 8. Timothy asked for help again. This time he said his mother was hurt. I couldn't leave a child's mother in danger, going to help him find her. The next entry was in different handwriting. M. Patterson found deceased near the old chapel. Cause of death unknown. Body showed no signs of trauma, but was discovered in a location impossible to reach without climbing equipment. 1983. R. Chen, day 15. Timothy says his mother is trapped and crying. I can hear it too now, faint crying from the woods. A mother shouldn't suffer like that. Going to investigate. Again, different handwriting. R. Chen found deceased in the woods beyond cemetery boundaries. Cause of death, exposure. Body discovered in a ravine that local authorities confirm has been dry for over 50 years. 1995. S. Williams, day 22. Timothy is getting more desperate. He says his mother has been calling his name. I've heard it too. A woman's voice calling Timothy from the old section. She sounds terrified. I have to help. Different handwriting. S. Williams found deceased near the Wright family plot. Cause of death unknown. Body discovered in a location that would have required passing through locked gates and climbing over a 15-foot fence. I closed the logbook and wrote my own entry. H. Murphy, night 35, 3:07 a.m. Encountered Timothy Hartley near children's section. Followed Rule 4. Spoke kindly, but did not follow. Timothy requested help finding his mother. Claimed she was trapped and hurt. Maintained position despite strong emotional compulsion to assist. Research shows Timothy died 1903, 3 days after Mother Eleanor died of same disease, both buried in unmarked graves. Note: Timothy's desperation appears to be increasing over time. I paused, then added, the guards who followed him weren't found in random locations. They were found near other spirits, the chapel, the woods, the Wright plot. Timothy isn't leading people to his mother. He's leading them to other supernatural entities. The rest of my shift passed quietly, but I couldn't stop thinking about Timothy, about a 7-year-old boy who'd been searching for his dead mother for over a century, not understanding that she couldn't come to him because she was just as lost as he was. When Felix arrived at 6 a.m., I showed him what I'd discovered about the 3 guards. You figured it out, he said, nodding approvingly. Timothy isn't malicious. He genuinely wants to find his mother. But he's been dead so long that he can't tell the difference between the living and the dead anymore. He leads people to other spirits thinking they're his mother, or thinking they can help him find her. The desperation makes him confused. He sees what he wants to see. Felix looked out the window toward the children's section. The tragedy is that his mother is probably here somewhere. But she's as lost as he is, and neither one can find the other. Why don't you just tell him where she is? Felix was quiet for a long moment, because knowing might be worse than hoping. Right now, Timothy believes his mother is alive somewhere, waiting for him. If he learned the truth, Felix shrugged. Some spirits move on when they find peace. Others become something else entirely when they lose hope. I thought about Timothy's tears, his desperate need to help his mother. So he just keeps searching forever? Unless someone follows him and doesn't come back. Then he gets a few years of thinking he's finally found help before the next guard starts working here. Felix gathered his things. You did the right thing, Heather. I know it didn't feel like it. After Felix left, I sat in my car for a while before driving home. I kept thinking about Timothy's small hand in mine, the cold that had spread up my arm, the absolute trust in his eyes when he'd asked for help. The job paid well because it required you to break a child's heart to save your own life. I started my car and drove away, but I couldn't shake the image of Timothy walking alone toward the oak tree, still searching for a mother who'd been dead for over a century. Some kinds of love, I was learning, were too strong for death to break, and sometimes that was the most dangerous thing of all. I stood before the crypt entrance at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in December, my breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. 2 months of following the rules perfectly had given me something I'd never expected to feel in this place: confidence. I knew how to handle Margaret's desperate reaching. I could resist Timothy's heartbreaking pleas. The laughing thing had tried me twice more since October, and both times I'd hummed it away without breaking a sweat. Even the shadows during quiet hour had become predictable. Dangerous, yes, but manageable if you knew what to expect. But the crypt remained the one mystery that ate away at me constantly. The rusted iron door stood slightly ajar, just as it always had. No lock, no chain, no barrier except Felix's warning and the memory of Dominic Hughes's final logbook entry. Strange symbols were carved into the metal, not quite letters, not quite pictures, but something that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'd walked past this door dozens of times during my patrols. Tonight, for the first time, I stopped. The latch was simple, a piece of metal that would lift with the slightest pressure. I could see the mechanism clearly in my flashlight beam. No rust on the moving parts, no corrosion that would prevent it from opening. Someone had been maintaining it. My hand moved toward the latch before I even realized what I was doing. I jerked it back, Felix's words echoing in my head. Some questions are better left unasked. The scar running from his ear to his jawline. I learned better. But standing here now, after 2 months of surviving everything this cemetery could throw at me, Felix's warnings felt less like wisdom and more like paranoia. I'd proven myself capable. I'd earned the right to know what I was really protecting. I reached for the latch again, then stopped, pulled back, reached forward. This was ridiculous. I was a grown woman, not some curious teenager in a horror movie. I had a job to do, rules to follow, a paycheck that depended on my continued survival. But the not knowing was killing me. I knocked gently on the door. The sound was hollow, metallic, bouncing back from whatever lay beyond. I held my breath, listening for any response, any sign that something had heard me. 3 deliberate knocks came back from inside. My heart stopped. The knocks were perfectly spaced, clearly intentional, mimicking the rhythm I'd used. Something in there was responding to me. I knocked twice. 2 knocks came back. I knocked 4 times rapidly. 4 rapid knocks answered. "Jesus," I whispered, stumbling backward from the door. Then I heard my name. "Heather." Soft, barely audible, whispered through the gap under the door. "Heather, I've been waiting." The voice was male, familiar somehow, though I couldn't place it. It sounded tired, lonely, like someone who'd been calling for help for a very long time. "Heather, please, I know you can hear me." I backed away another step, my confidence evaporating like morning fog. Whatever was in there knew me, had been aware of my presence all along, waiting for my curiosity to overcome my caution. "I won't hurt you," the voice continued, growing slightly stronger. "I just want to talk. I've been alone for so long." The words tugged at something deep in my chest. The same maternal instinct that Timothy triggered, the same desire to help that Margaret exploited. But this felt different, more personal. "You're different from the others," the voice said, stronger, smarter. "You've lasted longer than anyone in decades." I turned and ran. My boots pounded against the gravel path as I sprinted back toward the security booth, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. Behind me, I could hear the voice calling my name, growing fainter with distance but somehow more urgent. "Heather, wait! Don't leave me here!" I slammed the booth door behind me and grabbed my phone with shaking hands. Felix had given me an emergency number on my first night. Only call if something happens that the rules don't cover. This qualified. Felix answered on the second ring, his voice instantly alert despite the early hour. "Heather, what happened?" "The crypt," I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. I knocked on the door and something knocked back. "It knows my name, Felix. It's been waiting for me." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Did you open the door?" "No, I ran." "Good." Felix's voice carried a relief so profound I could hear it through the phone. "You passed." "Passed what?" "The real test." Felix was quiet for a moment and I could hear him moving around, probably getting dressed. "Every guard eventually hears the call, Heather. The thing in the crypt, it learns about us, studies us, figures out exactly what to say to make us want to open that door." "What is it?" "Something older than the cemetery. Older than the town, probably. We don't know exactly what it is, only what it does." Felix's voice grew serious. "It feeds on those who enter willingly, not their bodies, their essence, their life force. It leaves behind empty shells that look human but aren't anymore." I thought about Dominic Hughes's deteriorating handwriting, his final entry about investigating the crypt. Hughes opened the door. Hughes opened the door. We found his body 3 days later, sitting in the security booth like nothing had happened. But his eyes were empty, completely vacant. He was breathing, his heart was beating, but there was nothing left inside. The image made my stomach turn. What happened to him? We had to put him in a care facility. He's still there, as far as I know. Alive, but not living. The doctors can't explain it. Felix paused. The thing in the crypt had been calling to him for weeks, pretending to be his dead father. Hughes wrote about hearing his father's voice, asking for help, begging to be let out. It told me I was different, stronger. It tells everyone they're special. That's how it works. It makes you feel chosen, important, like you're the only one who can help. Felix's voice carried decades of weariness. The truth is, it's desperate. It's been trapped in there for over a century, and it'll say anything to get someone to open that door. I looked out the booth window toward the old chapel, its silhouette barely visible in the darkness. "Why don't you just seal the door permanently? Weld it shut or something?" "Because it needs to be able to open from the inside." Felix's answer sent a chill down my spine. "The door isn't keeping something in, Heather. It's keeping something out. The crypt is a prison, and the thing inside is the guard." I sat down hard in my chair. "What?" "The symbols on the door aren't decorative. They're a binding spell, older than anything else in this cemetery. The thing inside isn't trying to escape. It's trying to keep something else from getting in." Felix's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And if it ever stops doing its job, if it ever abandons its post, what comes through that door will make everything else in this cemetery look like a children's story." The weight of that knowledge settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. So the rules keep us safe from the spirits that roam the cemetery. But our real job, the reason this position pays so well, is to make sure no one ever opens that door. Not to help the thing inside escape, but to make sure it never stops guarding whatever's on the other side. I thought about all the guards who disappeared over the years, all the logbook entries that ended abruptly. How many people have opened it? In my 37 years, 4. Hughes was the most recent. Felix was quiet for a moment. The others? Let's just say the care facility has a special wing. And you've never been tempted? Felix laughed, but there was no humor in it. Every single night for the first 5 years, it called to me constantly, pretending to be my dead wife, my father, my brother who died in Vietnam. It knew exactly which buttons to push. What changed? I realized that some responsibilities are bigger than curiosity. Some doors are meant to stay closed, not because of what might get out, but because of what might get in. Felix's voice grew firm. You proved tonight that you understand that. You chose the known dangers over the unknown horror. I looked at the logbook on my desk, filled with decades of entries from guards who'd faced the same choice. Most had made the right decision. Some hadn't. The thing in there, I said. Does it suffer? I don't know. Maybe. But if it does, that suffering is the price of keeping something infinitely worse at bay. Felix's voice softened slightly. I know it's hard, Heather. The not knowing eats at you, but some knowledge comes with a cost too high to pay. How do you live with it? The uncertainty? By remembering that my job isn't to understand everything, it's to protect everyone. Felix paused. You've been here 2 months now. That's longer than most guards last. You've proven you can handle the spirits, resist the temptations, follow the rules even when they don't make sense. You're ready for the truth. Which is, this isn't just a job, Heather. It's a calling. We're not security guards. We're sentries, the last line of defense between the world and things that should never see daylight. Felix's voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. Every night you come back, every rule you follow, every time you resist the call of that crypt, you're saving lives. Thousands of them, maybe millions. I sat in the silence that followed, processing everything he'd told me. The cemetery around me felt different now, not just a collection of supernatural dangers to navigate, but a carefully maintained prison with me as one of its wardens. Felix? Yeah? The emergency number. How many guards have called it? In 37 years? You're the third. What happened to the other 2? One quit the next day. Couldn't handle knowing the truth. Felix's voice grew sad. The other lasted another 6 months before the pressure got to him. He didn't open the crypt door, but he stopped coming to work. Just disappeared one night. And then we had to find someone else. Someone who could handle the responsibility without breaking under the weight of it. Felix paused. I think you're that someone, Heather. But the choice is yours. I looked around the security booth, at the logbook filled with decades of encounters, at the thermos of coffee that had kept me warm through countless cold nights, at the window that looked out over a cemetery full of spirits who'd become almost like neighbors. I'll be back tomorrow night, I said. I know you will. Felix's voice carried something that might have been pride. Get some rest, Heather. And remember, you did the right thing tonight. After Felix hung up, I sat in the booth for the remaining hours of my shift. I didn't do my 4 a.m. patrol. Instead, I stayed at my post watching the cemetery, thinking about the choice I'd made and the responsibility I'd accepted. When Felix arrived at 6 a.m., he looked older somehow, as if sharing the truth had aged him. How do you feel? Terrified, I said honestly, but also relieved, I guess. I finally understand what I'm really doing here. Felix nodded. The fear never goes away completely, but it becomes manageable, and the purpose makes it worthwhile. Felix, the thing in the crypt, does it know that I know now? Probably. It's been listening to our conversations for decades. But knowing the truth makes you stronger, not weaker. It can't manipulate someone who understands what's really at stake. I gathered my things and headed for the door, then stopped. "One more question. What's your real name?" Felix smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. "Leroy Gross." Felix is just what's embroidered on the shirt. He gestured to his uniform. "I've been wearing the same name tag for 37 years. Seemed easier than explaining. Why Felix? It means happy in Latin. Seemed like a good name for someone whose job is to keep the world from ending." Leroy's smile faded, though I haven't felt particularly happy in decades. I drove home as the sun rose over the cemetery, painting the headstones in shades of gold and amber. In my rearview mirror, I could see the old chapel growing smaller, but I knew I'd be back. Not because I needed the money anymore, though the pay was still good. Not because I'd grown attached to the spirits, though I had. I'd be back because someone had to stand watch. Someone had to make sure the rules were followed, the boundaries maintained, the door kept closed. I'd be back because I finally understood that some jobs were bigger than the people who did them. And I'd be back because, for the first time in my life, I was part of something that truly mattered. The crypt could call my name all it wanted. I'd never answer. Some doors were meant to stay closed forever.